Hey, good afternoon. I want to again apologize for last week. I was not feeling great, actually, still not feeling 100%, but the show must go on, as it were. Um, I hope that you found the videos from last week to be educational and enjoyable, especially that Annie Oakley video. Um, I was I was kind of surprised to find that. Um, but what we're going to do today is it's probably going to be a few videos because, well, I haven't been able to make a video over 20 minutes long on this particular laptop. Remember, I fried the one the school gave me. In fact, I have to figure out some time to go and get a new one. But this will work for now, I guess. But again, I do apologize. I appreciate everyone participating on the discussion board. I'm going to get to those as soon as I can. As long as you ask your question and write a little bit, you should be perfectly fine with that. If you got any questions about it, some of you have reached out to me. Um, and, I kind of keep the instructions on the discussion board a little bit vague because I want you to be able to go into the direction that you want to. You can talk about the reading. You can talk about the videos. You can talk about the lecture. You can point out any discrepancies because there's going to be some. Different sources often sometimes disagree about figures or interpretations, and when you notice that, mention it. It's very much worth talking about. So we're going to have westward expansion and the Gilded Age this week. And here we go. All right, so first thing is the term manifest destiny. 1837, a man named Theodore O'Sullivan coined the term. Basically said it was God's will that the United States expand all the way to the Pacific Ocean, and that's what's going to happen during this period. In fact, there's also what's called a young man's movement from actually before the Civil War who actually wanted to not only go all the way to the Pacific Ocean, but start going south and conquering Central and South America and the Caribbean and basically create a American empire. We'll actually see a bit of a reemergence of this idea when we get to imperialism. If you've watched, remember you can watch it for extra credit, CSA, Confederate States of America, that's the model that the CSA actually uses, is the Young American model. So anyway, manifest destiny, God's will that we tame this continent, that we take it for our own. Basically what Rudyard Kipling used to call, well, I guess he still would if he was alive, the white man's burden. It was our job not only to subdue this continent, but to civilize all these savages that we might find. As we're going to see, if you remember from 2010, and we're going to see here, we've always had a pretty complicated relationship with Native Americans. So we're fulfilling our birthright. Now, before the Civil War even ends, Congress is going to pass 3 acts that will really encourage westward expansion. The first one was the Morrill Land Grant Act of 1862. It sold public lands in the West to establish colleges specializing in agriculture, machinery, and technology. These are actually known as the land grant institutions. Each state has at least one. In southern states, especially, usually have 2. One that was predominantly white and one that was predominantly black because of segregation at the time. In Kentucky, the 2 land grant schools are University of Kentucky and Kentucky State. Kentucky State is a historically black university. And in Tennessee, I know one is Tennessee State, which is historically black. And I think the other, and I checked this and I can never remember it. Pretty sure the other one is UT Knoxville. But this is also why you got a lot of A&Ms out there and A&Ts. So that's important for a couple of reasons. One, it pushes people to the West, and 2, it starts the government's responsibility for helping with post-secondary education. Also passed the Homestead Act, which was talked about in the video. The figures I have is a little bit different. So basically, 160 acres of free land to settlers who were willing to live there for 5 years in improvement, though you did have to pay a $10 fee. If you didn't want to wait 5 years, you could pay $1.25 an acre and live there only for 6 months. Immigrants, landless farmers, ex-slaves, and women all took advantage of the opportunity. We saw that in the video. Congress made 600 million acres of land available to the public. This will set off the largest migration within the United States in our history. Land companies and railroads advertised their land. Many farmers, however, will go bankrupt further west because, well, frankly, they didn't really understand the climate. They had gotten out to the Great Plains at the end of basically a 10-year flood period. After that, it kind of went back to its normal dry drought conditions. It's actually one of the problems with agriculture in the West today. They keep growing things that, frankly, isn't very suitable for the climate and land. They basically, in California, one of their big problems is they keep trying to grow monsoon crops like almonds and rice and things. It's really not a very good allocation. That's actually where most of the water goes in California, is to agriculture. Excuse me. However, the northern Midwest, it was much better climate, better soil. We're talking about Iowa, figure out how to grow wheat and corn, things like that. Many homesteaders were actually speculators who wanted to claim the land and then turn around and sell it. So, how successful is the Homestead Act? Kind of depends how you feel. By 1900, 52% of the original claimants or their descendants held legal title to the land. So, is 52% a good success rate or not? I don't know. I kind of keep going back and forth on that. I'm actually kind of interested to see what you guys think. If you've already posted the discussion board for this, send me a message. Let me know if you think 52% of original claimants is good. The third act of Congress was basically what the video was about. It established the Transcontinental Railroad. As we saw from the video, the Union Pacific was to build from Omaha across the plains and the Rockies to meet the Central Pacific, who would build from California through the Sierra Nevada mountains. To help pay for this, Congress gave the railroad companies land 10 square miles around their tracks and granted low-interest loans. Without the government, this never would have happened. So rugged individualism is, honestly, in a lot of ways, a myth. It took 6 years of work. Many Irish and Chinese immigrants worked on the railroads. On May 10th, 1869, at Promontory Point in Utah, the Golden Spike was driven in. As you saw, the guy actually missed it. There was actually a kind of a lot of corruption involved in this particular deal, as you saw in the video. But now we had railroad across the continent, which will make spreading out even easier. So now what I want to talk about is our interactions with the Native Americans. And what we're going to do is kind of split the West into regions, excuse me, and kind of briefly go over what Native Americans were there, tribes, etc. The video does a good job of talking about some of them. So there are hundreds of tribes in the West, about 360,000 total, which is a lot less than even a century before. Most tribes have been in the West, but some had come from the East. There are dozens in California who live in villages. There's also small bands of hunters and gatherers. Some of these groups include the Hoopa, the Karak, the Northern Peyote, the Pomo, the Wintrup, and the Yuki. You don't necessarily need to really remember any of those. Plus, when it comes to test time, you'll be able to use your book anyway. Their lives in California were first disrupted by Spanish and Christian missions up from San Diego. Many were actually exploited by the Spanish, converted and absorbed. Spanish, as I think I've talked about, at least in the other class, um, did something different than the English. The English did not want to interact with Native Americans. The Spanish basically conquered, absorbed them, and actually will create a kind of unique fusion heritage that we'll see in Central and South America. Um, California will be seized by the United States in the Mexican War. Uh, People began to go to California in droves once they found gold there, the 49ers. This sets off massive white migration, where they began to force natives off their land through violence, starvation, and disease. Thousands of Native Americans will be killed. However, some tribes will be able to maintain elements of their culture in Arizona, New Mexico, and West Texas. Some of those tribes will be the Hopi, Zuni, Rio Grande. They're the ones that make the Rio Grande and Pueblo tribes. So, forgive me, I think someone knocked on my door. Check on that. Oh, nope. Nope, not my door. It's amazing how things will kind of mess these things up a little bit. Anyway, I didn't want to stop because I'd already started and I don't know how to pause this thing. They're loud out there today. So, Rio Grande tribes, the Pueblo tribes. Pueblo tribes are the ones that built the awesome dwellings inside the cliffs. You may have seen in different programs. They will set up farming communities in western New Mexico, eastern Arizona. They'll grow corn, beans, cottons. They'll herd sheep. They'll trade at first with the Mexican ranchers. They'll trade pottery and cloth for manufactured goods. There's more tribes in East New Mexico and West Texas, including the Jicarillo, the Apache, and the Navajo. Those tribes will actually adopt the horse. The Navajo become sheep herders and follow the seasonal migration on the horse. They use the sheep for food and wool. They even had great silversmiths who created jewelry. If you've ever apparently gone to the Pacific South, the American Southwest, excuse me, still, you can still buy some of that wonderful jewelry. Let's move to the Pacific Northwest, where we have the Chinook, the Salish, the Yurok, and the Shasta. If you've ever been to the hospital, you probably have had Shasta College named after them. They tend to live in large villages. They grew vegetables and hunted bear, deer, and moose. Not the easiest things to hunt. Well, deer, I suppose. They also fished on the rivers and the oceans. They had these really impressive canoes that could go into the deep ocean. They're very good at woodworking. That's one reason I think that a lot of people believe that some of the Native Americans came by boat was because of the boats that they built there. Now, the Pacific Northwest actually does give us something that is common whenever you watch anything about Indians, especially the older the word I'm looking for is, I suppose, those stuff that tend to be a little bit, more than a little bit insulting. One thing you always saw in an Indian village was a totem pole. Well, the truth is those were actually native to the Pacific Northwest. So you see them in all of these Lone Rangers and everything else, but really they were only in the Pacific Northwest. They're actually really interesting in that they were in the middle of town or the village, and the idea there was that it basically used animal heads from top to bottom bottom to top to tell a story, sometimes of the village or something else. I got to sit through a Native American history class once, and the assignment for the day was to make your own totem pole, and I did the story of Batman. So I really like that idea, and I like the idea of allowing you to be creative. So for extra credit, and this is how I see if people are watching these videos, right? For extra credit, you can make your own totem pole. This will be worth up to 20 points. It's basically up to you how you can draw it or you can make it. I've had people make it out of paper towel rolls. Tends to be the easiest, I guess. I've had people use potter plants. But what you got to do is make it, take a picture of it, and send with it the story of your totem pole. And because there's actual work in that, it's worth up to 20 points. It's an opportunity to be creative, something I am not. In these tribes, women often wove baskets. Now, this kind of turns the whole Indians didn't own land thing on their head. There were some rich people in these communities. They actually did own land, but they were expected to practice what was called potlatch, and where you basically had to ritualistically give to the less fortunate. The idea that from whom much is given, much is expected. Or the Spider-Man thing, with great power comes great responsibility. That's actually a good place to stop this first video. We haven't gone quite 20 minutes, but we're about to get into the Great Plains Indians, which is the largest of the groups. So see you in